Kelsey Johnson. I'm a graduate student at Morningside College. My research is titled The Impact of FastForward Language on Third Grade Reading Proficiency. Early literacy implementation codes will be issued throughout the state of Iowa beginning on May 1st of 2017, and this will require any third grade student who is non-proficient that has not chosen one of the options of either the summer reading program or who qualifies for a good cause exemption to be retained. In 2014-2015, roughly 63% of students were proficient in the state of Iowa in reading at the beginning of the school year. Over the course of the school year, this percentage remained the same. So what this means is that 1/3 of third grade students in Iowa required a reading intervention during that school year. Screening requirements will be implemented for kindergarten through third grade, and the early literacy implementation code states that those students that are substantially deficient must receive 90 minutes of daily scientific-based reading instruction based on a universal screening pre-approved by the state of Iowa. So teachers are seeking effective interventions, and one such intervention that exists is through the Scientific Learning Corporation, and that will be the focus of this research. The Scientific Learning Corporation developed a piece of software known as FastForward Language, which targets reading and language deficiencies through the use of acoustically modified speech. This is designed to enhance memory, attention, processing, and sequencing. Teachers need effective kindergarten through third grade interventions, and so my research was designed to determine the effectiveness of this particular computer program upon reading proficiency, particularly in substantially deficient third grade students. The reason I selected this topic and this particular emphasis is because I'm a third grade teacher and the ELI codes impact my students and my teaching. And of course I have a strong desire to enhance the effectiveness of my personal reading instruction and the interventions that I select to use with my own students. So several studies were reviewed. The first one was with What Works Clearinghouse. And 2,000 students between the ages of 5 and 17 were analyzed. It was concluded that alphabetics and fluency were minimally impacted. Alphabetics included things like phonemic and phonological awareness, letter knowledge, print awareness, and phonics. Comprehension and general literacy domains were ranked with a medium to high improvement index. Comprehension includes both reading comprehension as well as vocabulary development. When the WWC calculated their improvement index that ranged from negative to positive 50, they compared the percentile rank of the average student receiving the intervention to that of the control group. So based on that, you can see that alphabetics was +2, reading fluency had a positive 17, comprehension was positive 8, and the general literacy achievement was +3. Though the latter study provided supporting evidence of FastForward Language's use in enhancing reading comprehension and general literacy achievement, the variety of ages of participants did not provide specific data about third grade students. Loeb, Gillum, Hoffman, Brandel, and Marquise studied 102 6 to 8-year-old students. So I particularly liked this study because it was a little bit closer to the age range that third grade students fall into. They analyzed the effects of FastForward Language on reading and phonemic awareness, and then they compared it to 3 other programs. So they had 3 control groups: the computer-assisted language intervention, the individualized language intervention, as well as the attention control computer program. And you can see a summary briefly of what each of these programs offered, as well as the fact that FastForward Language has 7 different games that include acoustically modified speech. So this was a 6-week summer program, conducted 5 days a week. 1 hour and 40 minutes of those days were spent specifically on a treatment which remained consistent throughout the duration of the program. And this intervention aligns with the ELI codes. And what was found was that FastForward Language had short-term improvement in blending and sounds, words and sounds. However, the long-term results were insignificant. Based on the likenesses and the results between the CALI and the FastForward Language programs, acoustically modified speech is not considered a vital component in reading interventions. Overall, Loeb et al. determined that fast-forward language was not any more effective in increasing auditory perception processing than the other 3 programs analyzed in the study. This information correlates with the previously discussed study's data, as there is strong evidence that reading interventions must also be implemented of different varying types. Strong, Torgerson, and Holm in 2011 analyzed several different studies, and they also included a control group, and their goal was to determine the effects on reading and language. This assisted me in reviewing other studies on reading and language improvement, particularly geared towards school-age children with the fast-forward language intervention. And there were 2 different reading outcomes that these authors analyzed. That was single-word reading and then comprehension. They also analyzed expressive and receptive vocabularies as 2 different language elements. When Strong et al. Compared post-test scores with both treated and untreated control groups, the effect sizes were not markedly different than 0. Some of them even had negative differences. This indicated that fast-forward language did not produce outcomes that demonstrated an improvement in any of the 4 components of reading and language. Thus, it seemed that acoustically modified speech, as it is used in fast-forward language, did not produce significantly improved reading scores. The authors concluded that there is good evidence that some of the more traditional forms of teaching these skills have stronger effects than those in the studies of this review. So some of the gaps in the research were that there wasn't anything specifically targeted toward 3rd grade. It was always a larger range of ages. And most of these studies were conducted throughout summer reading programs rather than the academic year. And I was hoping to determine what the improvement of literacy levels would be upon the completion of 3rd grade, and it seemed that there wasn't any current research that could provide that information. So this would give useful information to 3rd grade teachers working to eliminate non-proficiency as well as to meet the upcoming demands that the early literacy implementation codes will ensue. The purpose of this research study was to determine the effectiveness of implementing fast-forward language version 2 with 3rd grade students who have scored below grade level in reading fluency for 2 or more data points. The author used this study to examine the reading growth of substantially deficient students who had used fast-forward language for 150 minutes per week from mid-October to the end of May throughout the 2015-16 school year. This would provide specific 3rd grade data as well as impacting my work as a practitioner because it would give me some more impactful reading interventions in order to enhance student success. The first part of my research design was to classify my students into the experimental group or one of the 2 control groups. This was based on requirements in my school district, and it helped me compare the results of fast-forward language to the other reading interventions that were utilized in the 2 control groups. The formative assessment screening for teachers, also referred to as FAST, was conducted in the fall of 2015. And then interventions were based on reading proficiencies that were determined through FAST, so substantially deficient students would receive fast-forward language, at-risk students received reading assistant as an intervention, and the proficient students received silent reading. There were 24 students. A few of the students were excluded from the study due to moves in and out of the district. 12 were male and 12 were female. At the onset of the study, the mean age was 8 years old, and upon the conclusion, it was 9 years old. This took place in a rural Midwestern town in Iowa. 46% of the students in my class were non-proficient. 25% of them had individualized education plans. 5 of these IEPs were specifically based in reading, and 3 of the students also received Title I support services for their reading. And then I used the FAST results to determine the groupings. A little bit about the FAST assessment are that students read 3 passages. Each passage they were allowed 1 minute for reading, and the reading errors were recorded in the Iowa portal, which then calculated the correct words that they read per minute by averaging the number of words read correctly on the 3 passages. And this average then was the score that was used to determine whether they fell below proficiency or were on level. So the screening that was done in the spring of their 2nd grade year as well as the fall of the 3rd grade year helped to determine which grouping they would be placed in. If they were below the fall fluency expectation only, then they were in the at-risk group. However, if they had also fallen below expectations in the spring of 2015, then they were placed in the substantially deficient group. Those that were at or above the benchmark were considered proficient, and new students could either be proficient or at risk due to the lack of data from the spring of 2015. So using this data to determine the groupings helped me to place 7 students in the Fast Forward language group. One of the students that was placed in this group was actually at risk. However, he was a reading student with an IEP, and so his need was higher, and so he was placed in this group. 14 used reading assistant. They were the at-risk kids. One of the students had read pretty close to the cutoff, but was below. However, that student received no special services, and so was placed in this group rather than the substantially deficient group due to limitations in the number of licenses available for the software. 4 of the students in my class were proficient, and those were the students who received silent reading as an intervention. This was conducted on Tuesdays through Thursdays for 30 minutes a day throughout mid-October to the end of May during the school year. We were limited, as I just mentioned, to 40 licenses for Fast Forward Language and 40 for Reading Assistant. This meant that we placed the highest needs in grouping those that were substantially deficient, and so we grouped them into Fast Forward Language first, and then we placed our first 40 students who were at risk into the Reading Assistant group. And there were a few remaining licenses, and so we placed some of the lower end silent reading students also in the Reading Assistant group just to give them a little bit of extra support. The materials that were needed were some type of a computer for students to conduct the intervention on. Computer software licenses were purchased by the district. 2 different types of headphones were used. Those students that used Reading Assistant as their intervention needed headphones that had a microphone. Those that used Fast Forward Language only needed the audio component. Dual headphone jack splitters were also available for the teachers who were conducting the intervention so that they could listen in on students and provide supports. Also, accounts needed to be created through the Iowa Tier website. The tool that was used to progress monitor participants who were substantially deficient and at risk was within the website of the Iowa Tier. The researcher required a computer or a tablet for data tracking. The 7 substantially deficient students and 3 at-risk students were monitored weekly on Thursdays through a 1-minute timed reading of an unfamiliar passage. These passages were standardized, and all 3rd grade students being monitored read the same passage on the same week. They were replaced weekly as per the numbering on the passages. On the next slide, you'll be able to see a sample passage that was read by students. All adults that administered the progress monitoring needed to complete online training. So here's one of those sample passages. Internal validity was ensured through 3 universal screenings of FAST, as well as weekly progress monitoring. External validity measures were taken by including a representative sample of the 3rd grade students, which was 24 students in total, and this procedure occurred in the classroom, which made it more valuable and meaningful to the students. So now I'll begin to discuss my analysis of the data. Fall, winter, and spring scores were compared across all 3 groups, and Table 4 is just a sample of some of the data that I'll be discussing a little bit later in the presentation. My hypothesis that reading scores would improve through the use of Fast Forward Language was supported. A repeated measures ANOVA was conducted using 3 different groups as between subjects variables in 3 different time periods that included fall, winter, and spring for the within subjects analysis. Group 1 was the experimental group that used Fast Forward Language. Group 2 was a control group using Reading Assistant, and Group 3 was a control group that used silent reading. An alpha level of 0.05 was used for all tests. The main effect for reading intervention was statistically significant. The p-value was less than 0.001. As seen in Table 1, post hoc analysis using 2 key post hoc criterion indicated that Group 1 had significant differences from both Groups 2 and 3. The p-value was less than 0.001, while Groups 2 and 3 did not exhibit statistically significant differences from one another. Their p-value was 0.070. Participants in Group 1 exhibited lower fluency scores than those in Groups 2 and 3 in an analysis of all 3 time periods. The mean scores are indicative of the correct words per minute read, and this was the expected result. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see some of the mean scores broken down a little further in table form. You can see the means in group. There was a significant main effect for the measurement time period. The p-value was less than 0.001 as indicated in Table 3. Two key post-hoc comparisons indicated there were significant differences between fall and winter scores. The mean difference was negative 24.94, and between the fall and spring scores, where the mean difference was negative 35.06. Table 3 supports that winter to spring scores did not indicate statistical significance. As seen in Table 4, when analyzing all three subjects across all time periods, scores improved from fall to winter to spring. This was the expected result. Figure 1 provides a bar graph depicting descriptive statistics of fall, winter, and spring mean fluency scores. The interaction between reading intervention and the measurement time period was not statistically significant. The p-value was 0.0765. Reading scores of substantially deficient students who used fast-forward language for 150 minutes per week throughout the school year were examined to explore a possible connection between improved scores and the use of the computer software. Scores were compared between students using fast-forward language, reading assistant, and silent reading. The author's hypothesis that reading scores would be improved through the use of fast-forward language was supported. Experimental group scores were significantly different than both control groups, while latter groups did not demonstrate statistically significant differences from one another. The mean of the experimental group was still lower than both control groups. The research question regarded the impact of fast-forward language on participants' reading fluency. While the research did designate improvement in student scores, the ANOVA test indicates that scores in reading were always lowest in the experimental group. In order to meet the state of Iowa's fluency standards, students in 3rd grade need to read 130 words correct per minute at the end of the school year. As seen in Figure 1, the spring mean of Group 1 was only 89.38 correct words per minute. Participants in this study using fast-forward were unable to make adequate improvement in order to meet the early literacy implementation guidelines. In the WWC's 2010 analysis, the strongest growth was in fluency. Fast assessment scores in my study were solely based on fluency, and you can see that the fall and the spring fluency scores were 54.38 and 89.38. So this growth is consistent with the WWC's findings that there was fluency growth. However, the contrast was that the present study didn't analyze any other components of a balanced literacy program. In Loeb et al.'s study, short-term blending was improved. My study also produced improvements in oral reading, so this showed similarities. In addition, my study didn't indicate any advantage to using fast-forward language in comparison to the other two control groups. This also aligned with Loeb et al.'s study. Strong et al. Determined that reading and language scores didn't occur through fast-forward language. However, in my study they did. This could possibly be due to differences in the duration of the study or other pre-existing conditions. Strong et al.'s conclusions aligned with mine because my research indicated there was a higher mean score with reading assistant than fast-forward language. There was also a higher mean with both control groups than the experimental group. There was a few limitations in my study. The first was that my group sizes were different. Group 1 had 8, Group 2 had 12, and Group 3 had 4 students. The ability groups were not randomized, which impacted the internal validity. And there was no long-term retention data because this study only took place over one academic year. It was located in a small Midwestern United States community, so this limited the diversity of the sampling. And there was some missing data with reading logs due to some students not returning theirs. I speculated that this was probably related to the motivation of the learners and possibly the reading ability, so there could have been some variables associated with reading improvement that were tied in with this piece. Some of the implications of this are that all three groups improved in fluency, and my research helped address the gap of missing data, particularly for 3rd grade students throughout an academic school year. Some of the components that I omitted in my study were word recognition, comprehension, expressive and receptive vocabularies, alphabetics, and general literacy achievement. So these were pieces that maybe could have enhanced the data that I obtained from my study. One of my suggestions are that parents and guardians continue to have conversations with their students about their reading and to really foster that reading growth at home. Teachers also need to continue providing balanced literacy programs that include interaction between the skill sets required for reading and the meaning-based portion of reading. So reading skill sets could include phonemic awareness, letter sound recognition, and familiarity with the alphabet. Vocabulary and comprehension skills are two facets of meaning-based readings, and including these components along with fast-forward language could instigate reading progress. In future research, I would recommend following students for several years, kindergarten through 8th grade, for example. This would help give more long-term data and allow a better analysis of the overall growth, which would increase the temporal validity. Also, examining other components, such as comprehension, would give a better indication of the overall reading growth. Some widely used assessments are Pontius and Pinnell, the STAR test, and the NWEA assessment. So those are just a few examples of something that might be used. Also, I would like to diminish the negative impacts on population validity by providing more equal numbers of students in groupings that were randomly assigned and collaborate with other educators across the country and or the world. Ecological validity could be improved through requiring written summaries from students or oral check-ins with the teachers with the at-home reading so that piece could also be considered. Thank you for listening to my presentation on the impact of fast-forward language on third grade reading proficiency.